Bates reporting for the BBC Schools Football Team. Today, well-known author Meg Rosoff is visiting the Holt School, and we take this golden opportunity to ask her a few questions about her life. So could you tell us a bit about on your background life, like your childhood?
Oh, my childhood was a very long time ago. I grew up in America, in the suburbs of Boston, and I was one of 4 sisters. I was number 2, and my father was a doctor, and I went to local schools, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, and I think it was probably really, really ordinary. And actually, for a really long time, I thought I couldn't become a writer because my childhood was much too ordinary. And I sort of discovered that that's not entirely true, luckily.
Okay. How did you start to write your books?
Well, I was quite old. I was 46 when I wrote my first book. And I think the reason I didn't write before that, I always secretly wanted to be a writer, but I didn't think I could do it. I didn't think I was magical enough. You know, I thought you had to be some kind of really special person in order to be a writer. And also, I'm not very good at storytelling, at plots. And so I thought that just completely eliminated me from being a writer. But eventually, I just thought, I hate my job. I was working in advertising, and I can't let my life just keep going on like this, doing something I don't like. So I thought, I'll try to write a book, and I did, and I've been a writer ever since.
And what sort of books do you like? What do you like to write? So what sort of genre?
What do I like to write? Well, you know, I know kids now are really interested in the whole idea of genre, but I actually didn't even know what genre was, particularly until quite recently. I never learned about it in school, and I just thought, well, some people write science fiction and some people write, you know, historical novels, and everybody else is kind of in between. So I never really thought about genre at all. I just wrote the books I wanted to write. And I guess you'd kind of call it literary crossover fiction. How about that? Because a lot of my readers are adults. About half my readers are adults, about half are teenagers. And they're more literary than, say, action-adventure.
Okay. Who and what's influenced your writing?
I think absolutely everything in my whole life has influenced my writing, basically. I mean, because I was so old when I started writing, I had all these experiences, you know, and the great thing about being a writer is that you discover that every bad relationship you have, every time you have a friendship that goes wrong, or you go home to have Christmas with your family and you end up in a great big argument or something like that, that it all gives you more layers as a person. And obviously the good stuff is great anyway, but you know, it's good to know that all the bad things that happen to you in your life give you a bit more insight into how human beings really think. And so I guess that's probably, you know, just the fact that I was 46, you know, when I wrote my first book, there was just, I had all these different careers and different jobs and different boyfriends and, you know, ugh.
Have you had any low moments in your career in writing, and how have you coped?
Yes, writing is full of low moments. I mean, it's the best job in the world in lots of ways because, you know, 25 years I got up in the morning and I put on nice clothes and I got on the Northern Line and I went to work and a job, and then you're always reporting to someone and you have to be there at a certain time, and, you know, so when you're a writer, you can hang around in your pajamas all day if you want, and, you know, if you don't work, nobody's going to shout at you. It's just yourself. But sometimes the books don't go very well. You know, when people read a book, they read it chapter 1, beautiful, all complete. Chapter 2, all beautiful, all complete. It's not really the way people write books. They write them, they're messy, and they don't work, and the plots get all mixed up, and you get to the end, and it doesn't make sense. And so there have been books where I've just had a lot of trouble making them come together. And especially my last book, There Is No Dog. It was really difficult to get it all to just work together. So those are the bad moments where you think, oh, this is never, ever going to work.
Have you ever put yourself or people you met in your books?
I certainly put myself in all my books. I mean, you wouldn't recognize me necessarily, but there's bits of my personality in every single one of my characters. And people I know creep into the books too, but not literally. You know, I would never take a person I know and put them as they are in a book, but I will take the feeling of a person that I know and I'll put that into a character. And the person themselves won't recognize that that has a lot of elements of them, and I sometimes mix in some elements of somebody else. But yeah, I mean, what else are you going to write about except what you know?
Yeah. How do you get your inspiration for characters that may not be influenced or inspired by yourself or others?
You know what, I don't really know the answer to that question. That's a hard one. I think everything is influenced by things you've experienced. But for instance, I worked in advertising for a long time and I never really liked it, and I was made redundant. I was sacked about 5 times or something, and for a while I wanted to use the names of some of the horrible people that I worked for, you know, as my villains, if I had any villains. But it didn't work because that was the real world sneaking into a fictional world. So, you know, it's almost like you collect people and you put them in a blender, and, you know, different ones come out, and they just kind of appear in your books. I know it sounds really woo, but it's almost hard to describe it other than that. But if you think about making a smoothie, you know, you might make a carrot and ginger and apple smoothie, which is really delicious. But then you might make a carrot and broccoli and pear smoothie, which tastes disgusting. You know, so it's a question of like getting the right ingredients all together, and then you get a person who works.
Did your childhood affect your writing at
Oh, I think, my childhood affected it hugely because, you know, there's a kind of a theory that people write about the time in their life where maybe there was the most amount of incident or the most difficulty in some ways. And sometimes if you talk to children's writers, they'll say, oh, something terrible happened to me when I was 8, you know, my father died or something. And there's a little bit of a theory that if something awful happens, you get stuck there. And it's amazing how many children's writers, if you ask them, will say something happened. For me, it wasn't so much something happened, but it was my teenage years seemed to go on for a very long time. So, you know, I just got moving at being a teenager when I was about 16. And then I left America when I was 19 and moved to London. And then I really became a teenager. Then I you know, learned to play the bass guitar, and I, you know, discovered all the things you're supposed to do when you're, you know, a teenager. And then it went on and on and on. So all through my 20s, I felt like a teenager. And then all through, you know, mostly through my 30s. So I guess you could say I've thought about that period of my life a lot, because I spent a lot of time in it.
What's the most important thing in your life and why?
Oh God, no one's ever asked me that question before. The most important thing in my life, I guess I would have to say my family. You know, you kind of have to say that because you but it is, you know, my husband and my daughter are the most important thing in my life. But I'd say everybody's life is made up of a few different elements, and each one of those elements is as important as the others. So if I had a wonderful husband and a fabulous daughter, but I was sitting at home or in a job I hated all the time, or just doing nothing with my life, my life would feel all lopsided and wrong. So I would say my family, writing, my job, you know, because that's what I do every single day. And I ride horses. I took up riding horses when I was 50, and that's become really important too. It's a total immature part of my life.
What's your most embarrassing moment?
In my whole life?
Yeah.
Oh my God. You know, there's so many. I don't even know where to start. Oh. I'm really clumsy, and I do remember falling flat out when I was living in New York City and looking really cool and thinking I was really cool. I was wearing these really high heels, and I was walking down the road, and 57th Street, really, really cool street, and I just tripped and fell literally flat on my face in front of one of the fanciest like men's clubs in the world. There were all these like men in fantastic uniforms with like gold braid, all standing there watching as I just went whack on my face, and I had to kind of scramble to my feet, and they were going, "Are you okay? Like, you look like you might be really damaged." And I was like, "No, I'm fine," and I kind of walked off like a drunk person, and I felt really ill for the whole day, but I had to pretend I was okay because it was so embarrassing.
And what was your funniest moment?
That might have been my funniest moment too. My funniest moment of my whole life? God. I can't think of my funniest moment. You know, my funniest moment. No, I can't think of it. It's not weird. But you know, my husband's really, really funny. And my daughter's really, really funny too. And so we spend a lot of time in my family being silly and sarcastic. And, you know, I mean, one of my recent funny moments was when my daughter came home from school and I was in bed with my laptop working. And it was like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And she came and she said, "Mummy, I want you to start being a normal mother." And I said, "Okay, what should I do?" She said, "Well, for one thing, you're supposed to tell me that I've got to study really, really hard, otherwise I won't pass my exams. That's what parents do. I've got to tell me to revise." So I said, "Oh God, do I have to?" Okay. So the next morning, that was a Saturday, I knocked on her door at 9 o'clock, and I said, "Gloria, wake up. It's time to revise." And she just looked at me, she said, "I'm sorry, it's totally not convincing coming from you." And I said, "Oh well, I tried." And I thought, so that's what's like in our family. She's the responsible one.
Sorry, I've got a question. Do you ever read your books after they've been published?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, the answer to that is pretty much no. And in fact, somebody was asking me something about How I Live Now, which they're making a movie out of. It was a very minor character, and I couldn't remember the name. And they looked at me like, "What do you mean you can't remember the name of a character in your own book?" And I said, "Well, I haven't read it in 7 years since it was published. 8 years almost since it was published." And they were saying, "Well, that's ridiculous." So I thought, okay, I'm going to read it. So I went back and I started reading it, and I just felt a bit, you know, I just couldn't do it. So I don't know why it is, but I don't like going back to them.
Do you see other authors as competition?
Well, yes and no. I mean, so many of my really close friends are other authors, and so many really, really good authors are my close friends. And yeah, I mean, we're a bit competitive, but for instance, you know, if one of my close friends wins a prize that I'm up for, I think, I might be a little bit disappointed, but I think, good for you, that's fantastic. You know, as long as it's somebody I like. If it's somebody I don't like very much, then I do feel quite competitive. So.
What do you think about coming into schools to talk about books and things?
Oh, I really like coming into schools. Because everybody thinks that when you're writing about teenagers that you're always observing, you know, how they work and what they do and all that, but it's not like that at all. It comes from the inside of my head and from my own life as a teenager. So for me, it's something kind of completely different to talk to kids of different ages. And I was talking earlier about the fact that, you know, there are these big shifts that happen each year. You know, for an adult, the difference between when you're 46 and when you're 52 isn't that much. But for a kid, the difference between being 15 or being 16 or being 14 and being 16 can be really huge. And I sort of like watching those shifts.
Okay. Thank you. That's it. This is Jessica and Ellie reporting from Hot School Wokingham for the BBC News report with Meg Rosoff.
Thank you.